up, Taiwan? I'm Liao with news from here in Taiwan and around the world. Taiwan needs to spend 10% of its gross domestic product on defense. That's according to U.S. President Donald Trump's nominee to become a top Pentagon policy advisor. Elbridge Colby made the comment during a grilling by U.S. lawmakers in Washington. Taiwan is planning to spend around 3% of its GDP on defense. So the question is, how much more can it afford? Jaime Ocon reports.
Security in Asia and Taiwan is a growing concern for the United States, which is in the process of confirming its team of defense policymakers. On Tuesday, Elbridge Colby, who was nominated for a leading position in the Pentagon, spoke about his concerns over Taiwan.
I've always said that Taiwan is very important to the United States, but as you said, it's not an existential interest. It's very important. The core American interest is in denying China regional hegemony. I think actually as a proportion of GDP, it's well below 3%. I agree with President Trump that they should be more like 10%, or at least something in that ballpark, really focused on their defense. So we need to properly incentivize them.
In the past few years, Taiwan has been working to increase its defense spending to arm itself and defend against threats from China, which seeks to take over the country by force if necessary. This includes billions of dollars on air defense systems, fighter jets, and various types of advanced missiles. But many in the U.S. say that Taiwan needs to move faster to address China's growing military threat. In recent months, there's also been growing concern over parts of Taiwan's defense budget being frozen or slashed by the opposition-controlled legislature.
It's disturbing to me that in recent months, the Parliament of Taiwan has moved to cut their defense budget. Are you disturbed by that move in the Taiwanese parliament?
I'm profoundly disturbed, Senator, and I think the question that you're raising is one that I've heard not only Democrats but Republicans raise often in private. Secretary Mattis, who was mentioned earlier, said we can't care more about your defense than you can. So this is where I think I've been trying in my communication and my recommendations for policy vis-a-vis Taiwan to try to induce them in whatever way possible.
But despite these calls for Taiwan to spend 10% of GDP on defense, analysts say that number is a huge challenge. Looking at countries around the world, very few spend more than even 5% of GDP on defense. But given Taiwan's situation, analysts say Taiwan does need to raise the bar.
We've seen Taiwan increase its defense spending year on year under the last president and continuing under President Liao. And this is it's been Herculean efforts to get what looks on paper like small, half percentage points of growth. But in the grand scheme of Taiwan's national budget, those are actually pretty significant changes.
Taiwan's defense ministry told TaiwanPlus that how it spends and allocates its defense budget is based on its own assessments. Taiwan is working to increase its defense spending, with President Lai announcing last month that the country would strive to allocate 3% of GDP on defense. The concern now, though, is the trade-off, and if defense really is the top priority compared to other necessary services and sectors in Taiwan.
Does that mean, the government decides to, reduce social services or other spending on healthcare, right? Things that really matter to Taiwan's way of life and the people of Taiwan. I just don't see it being politically viable for Taiwan to have to negotiate that social safety net that the people on Taiwan have come to really love, right?
Under U.S. pressure to boost expenditures, the decision to spend more on defense is one that only Taiwan can make. But given the changing nature of security in Asia, it's faced with a tough choice on how much priority to give to its own security. Andy Shui and Jaime Ocon for TaiwanPlus.
China says it's boosting its own military spending by over 7%, and it set a target of 5% economic growth for 2025. It announced these goals at the annual two-sessions meeting of the country's parliament. To unpack what this means for China and the world, Adil Brar spoke to Stephen Nagy, a professor of politics and international studies at the International Christian University in Tokyo.
China has kicked off the two-sessions meeting in Beijing with an announcement to increase its defense spending by 7.2%. What does this mean for Taiwan and the region?
So what we've seen over the past 20 years is actually China has increased their defense spending year by year about 10%. So 7% of the current GDP is still a very significant amount, and it has real implications for peace and stability across the Taiwan Straits in terms of the kinds of assets that China may acquire to pursue reunification on mainland terms. We generally think that the kinds of defense spending will be on modernizing the PLA, acquiring the capabilities to deal with modern warfare, which after the invasion of Ukraine by Russia will include drones and really frontline modern technologies, that it will be spending on these particular areas. But I think in the backdrop, we should also be understanding China's increase in defense spending within the context of the broader U.S.-China competition with President Donald Trump, who has committed to really strengthening the United States and securing peace through strength by diverting resources away from the European front, likely to the Indo-Pacific.
Do you believe their goal of 5% GDP growth in 2025 is realistic, especially given all the global challenges they are facing?
Fortunately or unfortunately, I don't think it's achievable. When we look at credible data sets such as the Rhodium Group or GovGal, Dragonomics, and Peterson Institute for International Economics, all of these really impartial research groups suggest that 5% growth is not possible. Rather, growth is probably sitting around 2%, 3%, with some real heavy headwinds, and that includes an additional 10% tariffs on Chinese products that were just put into force this week by President Trump.
Will the stimulus measures announced by Chinese Premier Liao be enough to boost the economy?
Well, what we've seen under President Xi Jinping, or General Secretary Xi Jinping, is that there's a firm commitment to the political aspects of their system rather than dealing with the structural issues with the economy. That means that politics is driving policy rather than economic fundamentals. And with that, Li Qiang or whoever else decides to put forward extra spending will, of course, encourage the average Chinese consumer to consume a little bit more. But in reality, they're not dealing with the fundamental structural challenges that the Chinese economy is facing for sustainable, meaningful, and long-term growth.
That was Stephen Nagy of International Christian University in Tokyo. U.S. President Donald Trump is calling on Congress to repeal the CHIPS Act, which provides more than $52 billion to boost semiconductor manufacturing in the U.S.
And we're not giving them any money. Your CHIPS Act is a horrible, horrible thing. We give hundreds of billions of dollars, and it doesn't mean a thing. They take our money and they don't spend it. You should get rid of the CHIP Act, and whatever's left over, Mr. Speaker, you should use it to reduce debt or any other reason you want to.
Trump's comments come after Taiwanese chip giant TSMC announced a $100 billion investment in U.S. operations. The company is already set to receive $6.6 billion in subsidies from the CHIPS Act, along with up to $5 billion in low-interest loans to build chip fabs in the U.S. state of Arizona. TSMC has declined to comment. Thailand ignored U.S. and Canadian offers to resettle dozens of Uyghur people, instead sending them back to China to avoid angering Beijing. That's according to sources cited by Reuters. The UN and human rights groups objected to Bangkok's decision to deport 40 of the men last week, warning they could face torture in China. The 48 men had been held in Bangkok for a decade after fleeing China's Xinjiang region and crossing the Thai border without a visa. While Taiwan has a de facto embassy in the United States, Taiwan's two biggest political parties, the DPP and KMT, also maintain a presence in the U.S. Capitol. What do they do, and why does Taiwan need them? Well, I went to Washington, D.C. to find out. Shouting matches, thrown objects, and all-out brawls. Common sights in Taiwan's legislature between the country's two biggest political parties, the Democratic Progressive Party and the Kuomintang. The two sides often at odds over everything from ideology to policy. On foreign policy, though, the two parties take a similar approach. Without formal diplomatic ties, Taipei and Washington's relations are facilitated through the country's de facto embassy in the United States. And hoping to forge closer ties with their American allies, both the DPP and KMT also operate separate missions in Washington.
We're here to have a regular contact with different circles in Washington, D.C., including the U.S. government, Congress, the academic circles, and also our diaspora communities.
Retired Ambassador Victor Qin is the Kuomintang's representative in Washington. He's been in the U.S. for nearly 2 years now, helping re-establish the KMT's presence in the U.S. Capitol after the party's previous liaison office shut down in 2008.
I really worry about Taiwan, especially after the tensions arises in the Taiwan Strait. And I think I can play a part in making sure that the American friends understand our situation, understand our needs.
At a time when China's ramping up its threats against Taiwan, Qing says he's fighting the perception that his party capitulates to Beijing.
If you look deep down into the situation, you realize that KMT is not only not pro-China, it's actually the party that started this democratization process in Taiwan that brought democracy to Taiwan. It is not pro-China at all.
And despite their differences, Qin says partisan fighting doesn't make it to the U.S. And the KMT and DPP can work together in Washington to represent the best of Taiwan.
We don't have to be arguing, fighting all the way. And I know, especially in Washington, D.C., we're representing major political parties of Taiwan. And we don't want our American friends to see us fighting all the time. So
now that we've met with the KMT here in D.C., we're going to head down the road to meet with the DPP. Just a mile away, Iris Xiao heads the DPP mission in Washington.
The mission of DPP mission is simple. We invest, we align, we compete. Diplomat, because diplomats come and go every couple of years. But we were here, we have, for 11 years now, we have institutional memories.
While Taiwan's representative office carries out the country's formal diplomatic policies, Xiao's able to get closer to D.C. policymakers.
We help people in this town, in the Washington's policy community, to understand what's going on in Taiwan. And, you know, because the domestic politics, given it's really foreign and difficult for people to understand, even they follow Taiwan closely.
Xiao says her job is also about fighting misperceptions about her party's relationship with China.
We are also facing a growingly competitive war on narratives. In this town, the long conventional wisdom of DPP as provocateur for cross-strait relations.
Nothing separates the KMT and DPP more than their views on China. But when it comes to representing Taiwan in Washington, Xiao and her counterpart both agree. It's all about putting their best foot forward.
I was put on the same panel with my counterpart, KMT counterpart, a couple of times. We don't engage in friendly fire.
Both parties say they're doing what's best for Taiwan. Back home, it might seem like whenever one party comes up heads, the other is obligated to go tails. But here in D.C., the KMT and DPP are two sides of the same coin. Leon Lien, Laurel Stewart, and Leslie Liao in Washington, D.C. for TaiwanPlus. And thank you for watching What's Up Taiwan. You can visit the TaiwanPlus website or follow our social media for more stories from Taiwan and around the world. Finally, check out this parade in Bolivia that aims to revive traditional indigenous dances. I'm Leslie Liao. Take care and see you next time.